Just before sunrise on March 6, 2024, unmarked federal trucks rolled quietly onto Valentine Avenue while most families inside Fordham Manor were still asleep behind locked apartment doors. Agents wearing tactical vests flooded the sidewalks between East 194th Street and East 196th Street, then started dragging men outside wearing hoodies, sweatpants, handcuffs, and confused looks, while neighbors watched everything through cracked blinds from dark kitchens upstairs. Folks living on that block already recognized names like Malo, Shank, Swizz, Colombo, even before reporters started printing them across headlines later that morning, although what those names actually meant reached deeper than one federal raid. By the time those doors started getting smashed open, Valentine Avenue had already belonged to those dudes for years. Valentine Avenue never looked like the kind of place federal prosecutors would eventually describe as a neighborhood held hostage by organized drug crews for decades, although people living there understood the situation long before court papers finally caught up. The stretch between East 194th Street and East 196th Street sat inside Fordham Manor like its own isolated corridor, while the one-way, southbound layout gave lookouts enough visibility to spot approaching police vehicles almost half a block early. Rooftops connected across old apartment buildings, lobby entrances stayed crowded through most evenings, plus stairwells gave dealers escape routes that became second nature after years of movement through those buildings. Drug users from Connecticut, New Jersey, Yonkers, Harlem, sometimes even deeper parts of upstate New York, drove directly into Valentine Avenue searching for heroin, crack, fentanyl, whatever stamp happened to move strongest that week. Locals called the area Drug Alley long before the Valentine Avenue crew became famous across newspapers, although younger residents shortened everything down into one phrase by simply calling it the block during casual conversations outside bodegas. Parents raising children there learned the dealer schedules almost the same way working people memorize train times, while grocery runs usually happened earlier during calmer afternoon hours before street activity picked back up. Elementary school kids walked past fiends sleeping near sidewalks around Poe Park almost every morning, yet older residents barely reacted anymore after watching similar scenes repeat through multiple decades across the same corridor. Patrick Wynn, who moved there with his wife while raising children nearby, eventually started discussing relocation seriously after realizing dealers controlled building entrances openly without needing constant gunfire or public chaos. What made Valentine Avenue strange involved how ordinary everything looked during daytime hours, despite federal prosecutors later describing a violent criminal enterprise operating there continuously throughout entire years. A mobile surveillance tower often stood near the corner like the permanent furniture nobody expected to disappear, while residents still attended church services, caught buses toward Grand Concourse, and tried balancing regular family life around visible narcotics activity happening directly outside. Dealers rarely screamed or acted recklessly unnecessarily once the Valentine Avenue crew matured operationally, since maintaining steady business mattered more than random public attention that could disrupt money flow. That quiet discipline later became important once Edwin Carrasquillo, around Fordham Manor as Malo, started building influence slowly through the neighborhood during the early 2010s. People outside the Bronx usually imagine major street figures acting flashy constantly, although Malo carried himself more like somebody woven quietly into neighborhood routines than some loud celebrity chasing unnecessary attention everywhere. Residents knew his face, recognized people connected around him, understood certain corners belonged to his organization, although conversations about him usually happened carefully once unfamiliar people entered earshot nearby. Federal indictments later connected Malo directly to racketeering conspiracies, narcotics trafficking, shootings, extortion, firearms offenses, even a murder, although those accusations surfaced publicly years after his reputation had already settled deeply into Valentine Avenue itself. The wild part behind Malo's rise involved how this neighborhood had already survived another powerful organization before his own crew finally stepped forward. Years before the Valentine Avenue crew into a federal RICO case stretching across decades, another operation already transformed the same Bronx corridor into one of New York City's busiest open-air heroin markets. Wilson Guerrero, Antonio Carrasquillo, Enrique Rick Esquilin, plus Louis Gabe Esquilin controlled the La Perla organization during the mid-2000s, while investigators later estimated their network generated somewhere between $25,000 and $40,000 daily through street-level heroin sales alone. Customers recognized brand names stamped directly onto glassine envelopes, including La Perla, Salsa, Tuna, Sabroso, while addicts traveled from Connecticut, New Jersey, Long Island, sometimes farther, searching specifically for those products around Valentine Avenue. The operation functioned almost like a retail franchise operation rather than random corner hustling after rotating seller shifts, kept heroin available continuously through daytime hours, overnight stretches, rainy weather, freezing winters, and nearly every condition imaginable. The organization survived efficiently partly through geography, since Valentine Avenue practically handed advantages directly toward experienced drug crews, understanding how street visibility worked around Fordham Manor buildings. Police approaching southbound became visible almost immediately through the corridor's long, uninterrupted sightlines, while rooftops connected across neighboring apartment structures gave runners escape routes whenever pressure suddenly intensified nearby. Stairwells doubled as stash locations, lookout towers, temporary hiding spots, while packaging locations stayed separated from selling corners through off-site apartments located away from Valentine Avenue itself. Heroin often arrived already prepared for street distribution before younger workers rotated outside handling direct transactions, with customers lining sidewalks throughout most evenings around the block. Residents watched the entire operation expand openly while trying to preserve normal family routines underneath conditions that slowly exhausted people psychologically through repetition rather than sudden dramatic violence constantly exploding every night. Mothers kept children indoors longer than necessary after dark, while longtime tenants started recognizing familiar out-of-state license plates circling nearby almost daily, searching for narcotics. Monsignor John Jennick from Our Lady of Refuge Church became one of the loudest public critics after placing wooden crosses along Valentine Avenue carrying anti-drug messages intended to shame dealers operating openly outside residential buildings. Community marches happened repeatedly during those years, although frustration usually outweighed optimism once residents realized arrested sellers often disappeared briefly before replacements filled identical corners shortly afterward. By 2010, investigators finally launched the kind of operation local families spent years hoping somebody inside law enforcement would eventually build carefully enough to survive prosecution afterward in courtrooms. Federal agents, Bronx prosecutors, undercover officers, surveillance teams, wiretap investigators spent roughly 9 months documenting the La Perla organization before authorities finally moved aggressively during July 2010 against 31 different suspects tied directly to the operation. Police seized more than $1.5 million in cash, several kilograms of heroin, roughly 500,000 glassine envelopes, multiple vehicles, while leaders like Wilson Guerrero plus Antonio Carrasquillo suddenly faced drug kingpin charges, carrying possible life sentences afterward. Residents walked outside following those arrests, noticing something unfamiliar around Valentine Avenue for the first time in years, which was actual silence replacing the usual steady movement around building entrances. For a short period, people genuinely believed Drug Alley finally died permanently after the La Perla takedown dismantled one of the Bronx's most established heroin organizations through overwhelming federal pressure. Patrick Wynn later described tension disappearing almost immediately once sellers vanished temporarily from sidewalks surrounding East 194th Street, while police commanders flooded the area with additional foot patrols, hoping permanent visibility could discourage another operation from rebuilding there quickly afterward. Families started relaxing slightly during evening walks. Children spent more time outside again. Neighborhood conversations carried cautious optimism, even while older residents quietly warned younger people not to become too comfortable too fast. The problem involved how the street itself never changed. While empty territory inside the Bronx rarely stays available very long, once millions previously circulated through the same few corners. Around that vacuum, younger hustlers, studying older crews, carefully started reorganizing systems already tested successfully during the La Perla years, although Edwin Carrasquillo eventually separated himself gradually from everybody else moving around Valentine Avenue afterward. The customers already knew where buying happened before Malo's crew even stabilized operationally around 2012, while rooftops, lobby entrances, stash locations, and lookout points remained identical after previous organizations disappeared. Younger dealers inherited routines older organizations perfected through decades across Valentine Avenue, although Malo's generation slowly modernized operations around fentanyl distribution while tightening discipline across the block itself. By the early 2010s, residents noticed familiar patterns returning steadily across Fordham Manor again, except newer faces now controlled corners where older crews once stood comfortably years earlier. By the early 2010s, Edwin Malo Carrasquillo stopped acting like another hustler floating around Fordham Manor while slowly turning Valentine Avenue into a disciplined operation that moved almost continuously through every hour of the day. Lookouts posted themselves near lobby entrances, rooftop ledges, stairwells, and sometimes even outside bodegas, while younger runners rotated through shifts carrying packaged fentanyl, heroin, crack, and cocaine between stash apartments scattered around the block. Customers already understood the routine before stepping from vehicles arriving through East 194th Street, which allowed transactions to happen quickly enough that many buyers stayed parked for less than 3 minutes before driving back toward the highways. Malo organized people carefully enough that police pressure rarely interrupted business permanently, while familiar names, including Hector Heck Hernandez, Jose Nene Hernandez, Nathaniel Tio Manning, Demel Shank Marcus, Eduardo A.R. Moreno, Steven Swizz Santiago, plus Victor Cali Mendang, gradually became recognized around the neighborhood alongside him. Hess carried himself like one of the older stabilizing figures around the operation, while Nene handled enforcement situations involving unpaid debts, missing packages, and outsiders attempting unauthorized sales nearby. Tio earned respect through longevity around the corridor, although Shank developed a reputation connected more toward intimidation, discipline, and physical pressure against people, creating operational problems around Valentine Avenue. AR moved through the crew carrying a nickname tied directly to firearms culture, while Swizz remained active enough that his name repeatedly surfaced through federal charging documents years later. Cali eventually landed inside Rikers Island before the massive 2024 federal sweep happened, although prosecutors still wrote him directly into federal custody afterward, proving investigators considered him deeply connected, despite already sitting behind bars elsewhere. Everything around the organization worked through structure rather than chaos, which allowed the block operating nearly 24 hours daily without constant public shootouts destroying business flow unnecessarily. That discipline created something more dangerous than random street violence, because residents eventually realized the Valentine Avenue crew controlled people psychologically long before physical force became necessary around the block itself. Addicts arriving sick from fentanyl withdrawal rarely argued once debt started stacking aggressively through daily purchases, while weaker customers slowly became trapped inside cycles involving borrowed money, intimidation, public humiliation, and threats tied to repayment. Federal prosecutors later described extortion involving sexual acts demanded from vulnerable users unable to cover drug debts financially, although residents around Valentine Avenue already whispered similar stories years before indictments made everything public officially. Women struggling through addiction reportedly disappeared temporarily into stairwells, building hallways, hidden apartments after arguments started over unpaid balances, while younger dealers nearby learned quickly how exploitation generated extra profit alongside narcotic sales. Fentanyl changed everything further because dependency happened faster, overdoses became common, and desperation intensified daily around Poe Park, building entrances throughout Fordham Manor. People outside the Bronx often imagine street organizations staying trapped inside neighborhood borders, although Angel Villafane's story showed how Valentine Avenue violence stretched well beyond the block once money disappeared unexpectedly. Villafane became tied to multiple Manhattan shootings connected directly to narcotics debts, including incidents near 2nd Avenue, East 97th Street, and later around 110th Street near the FDR Drive during 2020 and 2021. Prosecutors described situations where victims allegedly owed money tied to Bronx drug distribution networks, while Villafane reportedly tracked them across borough lines, carrying firearms openly before confrontations escalated violently outside apartment buildings. One victim allegedly heard Villafane ask, "What's up now?" immediately before gunfire erupted, showing how neighborhood disputes from Valentine Avenue spilled directly into Manhattan streets afterward. Years later, while sitting inside the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn during October 2024, Villafane allegedly tried smuggling 21 ceramic scalpel blades hidden inside Doritos bags, which reinforced federal arguments claiming some Valentine Avenue figures stayed operationally dangerous even after incarceration already removed them physically from the neighborhood. The organization also relied heavily upon women operating deeper inside logistics than outsiders usually expect, while hearing stories involving Bronx narcotics crews controlling residential corridors for years. Delilah Carroll and Rosemary Rosie Sanchez appeared inside federal indictments as active participants rather than peripheral girlfriends, standing beside photographed defendants during court appearances afterward. Investigators believed women connected to the crew handled packaging, transportation, communication, stash apartment management, movement between suppliers, sellers, customers, while attracting less immediate police attention compared to heavily watched men standing publicly around corners. Johanna Alcantara later became especially important once prosecutors tied her directly to the murder conspiracy involving Yosei Hullix, although her deeper operational involvement reportedly stretched across years before that killing surfaced publicly. Those accusations changed how many people viewed the organization afterward, because they suggested internal loyalty, advancement, punishment reached far beyond ordinary corner dealing happening casually around Valentine Avenue. Another layer inside the story developed through 2685 Valentine Avenue, which almost functioned like a permanent headquarters for multiple generations of Bronx narcotics crews operating through Fordham Manor over decades. During June 2022, federal prosecutors charged 12 additional defendants connected to another organization manufacturing crack cocaine directly inside apartments located within that same building. Zucchila Plaza, Morris Sinclair, Lawrence Green, Louis Lawrence, Dayon Johnson, Nathan Smith, Esteban Oliva, John Graves, Ali Doby, Goddess Earl, Javen Hoskins, plus John Hendricks allegedly transformed residential hallways into another continuous drug marketplace operating independently beside Malo's organization. Residents complained constantly about buyers crowding lobbies, stairwells, elevators, and building entrances, while crack manufacturing allegedly happened directly inside apartments where ordinary families still attempted to raise children nearby. The situation proved Valentine Avenue no longer revolved around one organization alone, because entire buildings gradually adapted toward underground economies feeding off addiction throughout the Bronx. That same address carried another tragedy years earlier when a 17-year-old Hakeem Kuta ran from police officers entering 2685 Valentine Avenue during April 2015 after somebody reported teenagers smoking marijuana inside the lobby downstairs. Kuta sprinted toward the rooftop alongside another teenager, while officers chased behind them through stairwells familiar to countless dealers previously escaping similar pursuits around the building. While attempting to jump across a 10-foot rooftop gap toward another structure nearby, Kuta lost footing completely before falling 6 stories into the alley below, eventually dying 2 days later inside St. Barnabas Hospital. Friends later described him returning regularly toward Valentine Avenue, simply hanging around people connected to the neighborhood, although fear of police encounters inside heavily surveilled buildings already shaped how teenagers reacted once officers suddenly appeared nearby. His death became another story attached permanently to 2685 Valentine Avenue, reinforcing how ordinary residents often suffer consequences from environments controlled indirectly through narcotics activity surrounding them daily. Violence around Valentine Avenue slowly became normalized through repetition after shootings, overdoses, stabbings, and police raids blended together across years until residents stopped reacting dramatically each time another incident unfolded nearby. Dennis Rodriguez died after gunfire erupted outside Club Extreme in October 2014, following a fight spilling into the street, while 18-year-old Jonathan Martinez was shot outside a deli during March 2015, only blocks away from ongoing narcotics activity. Kids walking near Poe Park past addicts slumped against benches almost every morning heading towards school, while mothers learned to distinguish fireworks from gunshots instinctively through sound alone during nighttime hours around Fordham Manor. Residents still attended church services, bought groceries, waited for buses, raised children, although hearing gunfire often enough eventually muted emotional reactions people normally carry toward violence happening outside apartment windows repeatedly. By that point, Valentine Avenue wasn't just a neighborhood with crime on it. The drug economy had become part of the neighborhood itself. By 2020, the Valentine Avenue crew had already spent years building control through organized shifts, intimidation, fentanyl sales, and debt pressure, while internal distrust quietly started growing underneath all that structure. Jose Hullix belonged inside that world long enough that people around the block recognized his face, although nobody publicly explained exactly where his standing inside the crew started collapsing afterward. Rumors floated through Fordham Manor claiming Hullix pocketed money connected to narcotic sales, while other whispers suggested he talked carelessly around people connected to law enforcement pressure tightening around Valentine Avenue. Nobody outside the organization understood which version carried truth, although prosecutors later painted Hullix as somebody whose position inside the crew became dangerous enough that his own people allegedly decided removing him permanently solved larger problems. What happened next separated the Valentine Avenue crew from ordinary Bronx drug crews handling disputes through public shootings, which everybody nearby immediately recognized afterward. Federal prosecutors later alleged Edwin Malo Carrasquillo, together with Johanna Alcantara, orchestrated Hullix's death in June 2020 using fentanyl as the murder weapon instead of bullets, knives, or visible street violence. That detail shocked people familiar with gang stories around Fordham Manor because Hullix allegedly died through the exact product moving continuously across Valentine Avenue every single day through crew-controlled corners. Investigators described the killing as intentional poisoning tied directly to maintaining power inside the organization, while prosecutors later charged Malo plus Alcantara with murder in aid of racketeering after connecting Hullix's death to the broader criminal enterprise. Unlike drive-by executions leaving shell casings across sidewalks, this killing stayed quieter, harder tracing immediately, while still delivering the same message to anybody inside the crew considering betrayal afterward. Johanna Alcantara's name suddenly carried a heavier meaning once federal indictments publicly tied her to Hullix's death alongside Malo because investigators believed her involvement stretched beyond occasional proximity toward the organization. Prosecutors described Alcantara as somebody participating directly in operations connected to the Valentine Avenue crew rather than another girlfriend loosely orbiting around neighborhood figures carrying reputations through Fordham Manor. Her alleged role reinforced how women around the crew handle responsibilities deeper than outsiders usually assume while watching federal raids unfold later across Valentine Avenue during March 2024. Delilah Carriel plus Rosemary Rosie Sanch had already appeared inside earlier indictments connected to organizational activity, although Alcantara's alleged stepping into murder conspiracy territory suggested the structure operating underneath Malo reached further than random corner dealing crews, surviving week to week around the Bronx. That realization also deepened paranoia internally once members understood loyalty failures could allegedly end quietly through methods difficult to identify immediately afterward. Internal violence reportedly intensified across the organization during that same period, once pressure, distrust, fentanyl profits, overlapping egos started colliding harder inside the Valentine Avenue crew itself. Prosecutors later described a June 25, 2020 shootout during conflicts tied to organizational control around the block. Months later, another incident during January 2021 allegedly involved members attacking somebody inside the crew using chains plus firearms while enforcing discipline through severe violence rather than quiet warnings. Those moments revealed how organizations controlling millions through narcotics eventually start collapsing inward once everybody begins questioning who might cooperate, steal money, disrespect hierarchy, create exposure, attracting federal attention toward the block. People standing around Valentine Avenue started watching conversations more carefully afterward, while familiar faces suddenly disappeared from corners without explanation once paranoia spread deeper through the organization itself. At the same time, outside pressure kept building across Fordham Manor after years of shootings, overdoses, public addiction, narcotics activity, exhausting residents already frustrated through decades watching different crews recycle identical violence around Valentine Avenue. Anti-gun marches returned around the neighborhood while community leaders, pastors, and local activists demanded stronger intervention after seeing younger children growing up beside open-air fentanyl markets operating almost continuously nearby. Then, another horrifying moment hit the corridor during January 2022, once 11-month-old baby Catherine got struck in the face by a stray bullet during a shootout involving Ahmed Al-Torre plus Samuel Bautista chasing rivals near East 198th Street. That case involved another drug crew entirely, although residents understood instantly how every organization feeding narcotics into the Bronx eventually created identical destruction spilling toward ordinary families trapped nearby. By then, the whole area was running on fear, fentanyl, and retaliation. During the early morning hours of March 6, 2024, federal agents finally moved against the Valentine Avenue crew after years of quietly building investigations around Fordham Manor through wiretaps, surveillance operations, informants, narcotics cases, and overlapping gun investigations. FBI agents, DEA teams, NYPD officers flooded Valentine Avenue before sunrise, while search warrants hit apartments connected toward Edwin Malo Carrasquillo, Hector Heck Hernandez, Jose Nene Hernandez, Nathaniel Tio Manning, Damel Shank, Marcus, Jason Colombo, Rivera, Angel Villafan, Eduardo R. Moreno, Steven Swizz, Santiago, Victor Cali, Mendeng, plus several others tied toward the organization. Residents later described waking gradually toward flashing lights outside windows without fully understanding the scale until television crews started arriving later that morning around East 194th Street. Some people sleeping inside nearby buildings barely noticed the arrests happening initially, which almost reflected how normalized law enforcement presence had already become around Valentine Avenue after decades involving raids, narcotics busts, shootings, surveillance towers, and anti-gang patrols moving through the same corridor repeatedly. Federal prosecutors described the organization as a violent drug trafficking enterprise controlling Valentine Avenue through fentanyl sales, heroin distribution, crack cocaine operations, extortion, firearms violence, stretching across more than 10 years publicly, although later indictments pushed timelines even deeper. Damian Williams from the Southern District of New York stated, the crew held an entire Bronx neighborhood hostage through intimidation, narcotics trafficking, armed enforcement, while operating openly around residential apartment buildings filled with ordinary families. Investigators alleged crew members worked rotating shifts, controlling sidewalks, building entrances, rooftops, stairwells, while extorting vulnerable addicts through violence, threats, coercion, tied directly toward narcotics, debts accumulating daily. Those charges pulled together years involving shootings, debt collection, internal beatings, Manhattan gun cases tied toward Angel Villafane, plus broader narcotics investigations already circling Fordham Manor. Yet the story grew even larger 1 year later once prosecutors expanded everything into a massive racketeering conspiracy stretching back toward the early 1990s. During March 2025, federal authorities unsealed a superseding indictment charging 28 alleged members plus associates connected toward the Valentine Avenue crew under sweeping RICO conspiracy allegations covering murder, extortion, narcotics trafficking, firearms offenses, violent enforcement, and organized criminal activity spanning roughly 3 decades. Prosecutors claimed the enterprise operated continuously around Valentine Avenue from the aftermath of the crack epidemic through the fentanyl era, while describing generations of residents living underneath persistent fear tied to narcotics, violence surrounding East 194th Street. Jose Hullix returned directly toward the center of the federal case after prosecutors formally accused Malo, alongside Johanna Alcantara, of orchestrating Hullix's fentanyl poisoning during June 2020 for organizational reasons tied to maintaining power inside the crew. Authorities also highlighted allegations involving extorted sexual acts forced from addicted customers struggling through debt around the block, while multiple shootings, assaults, and internal disciplinary attacks surfaced publicly through court documents describing how the organization maintained control operationally. By that point, Valentine Avenue stopped looking like another neighborhood narcotics case while turning instead into one of the Southern District's largest Bronx gang prosecutions involving overlapping murders, narcotics conspiracies, racketeering allegations tied to one corridor. Once defendants started appearing inside Manhattan federal courtrooms, afterward, the scale became impossible to ignore because families connected to accused crew members crowded courthouse hallways during hearings stretching across multiple months afterward. Reporters covering proceedings described more than 50 relatives arriving during certain hearings involving DeMel Marcus, while defense attorneys argued prosecutors built conspiracy timelines so broad that some defendants were children when the alleged enterprise supposedly started. Lawyers representing multiple defendants challenged evidence, detention decisions, and discovery procedures, while prosecutors insisted the Valentine Avenue crew operated like a continuing criminal enterprise, carrying possible life sentences for central figures, including Malo. Judge Victor Marrero eventually handled sprawling proceedings involving overlapping defendants, murder allegations, firearms charges, narcotics conspiracies, while federal authorities kept expanding filings through additional superseding indictments afterward. Meanwhile, Angel Villafane remained tied to separate headlines after authorities accused him during October 2024 of attempting to smuggle 21 ceramic scalpel blades into Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center hidden inside Doritos bags, reinforcing perceptions that violence surrounding the crew never fully stopped once arrests happened. Back on Valentine Avenue itself, residents noticed temporary changes almost immediately after the federal sweep removed major figures controlling corners throughout Fordham Manor for years previously. Building entrances stayed quieter during certain evenings, while familiar faces disappeared suddenly from rooftops, stairwells, and lobby entrances where organized shifts previously operated almost non-stop through entire nights. Older residents who remembered the 2010 La Perla takedown reacted more cautiously than younger neighbors celebrating publicly afterward because they had already watched previous organizations disappear briefly before replacements eventually returned, reclaiming identical territory later. Community leaders continued anti-gun marches around the neighborhood, while police patrols increased visibility near Poe Park, Kingsbridge Road, East 194th Street, although uncertainty still hung heavily across the block afterward. Everybody understood narcotics demand never disappeared from the Bronx completely, while the same architecture helping earlier crews survive remained standing exactly where it always had. Even after federal indictments, courtroom appearances, television headlines, Valentine Avenue itself never changed physically beyond a temporary quiet, settling across sidewalks following the raids afterward. The same apartment buildings still overlooked the corridor, while children continued walking past faded graffiti near lobby entrances, carrying memories tied to organizations many younger residents barely remembered directly anymore. Older people around Fordham Manor could still point towards specific corners where La Perla cellars once operated before Malo's generation inherited identical territory years later through another cycle involving fentanyl, extortion, violence, and organized narcotics distribution. New residents moving into nearby apartments often saw ordinary Bronx buildings first before eventually learning why longtime locals still called that corridor drug alley quietly during conversations away from strangers nearby. For 30 years, different names controlled that block, but the fear always stayed at the same address.